Hello and good morning, everybody. My name is Jonathan Tate. I'm the Global Chairman of Turnkey, and I'm joined this morning by Grant Waterfall. Grant is the Head of Cyber Consulting for PWC in EMEA. Good morning, Grant.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. Hi, everybody. Looking forward to a good conversation.
So thanks, everybody, for joining. I know you might think there are more attractive things to do looking at the weather outside today, but we're very grateful you've chosen to join us. I'm sure this will be a very, very exciting and stimulating conversation we've got today. Grant and I have just been chatting beforehand. There's a lot to talk about. Just while we wait for a few people to connect, couple of housekeeping rules. I realize many of you maybe have been on prior sessions, but there's an opportunity to ask questions. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you wouldn't mind just clicking on that and typing out a question, we'll get through as many of those as we can at the end of the session. I think we felt it was a bit too disruptive to try and jump around between questions and the discussion Grant and I are going to be having as we go. We're going to go for roughly 30 minutes. It might go over a little bit, but not significantly. I hope you can stay with us for the majority of the discussion. So with that, I think we should get started. So Grant, as I said, welcome to this virtual conference. When we set up this conference, it was very explicitly not about COVID and not about the current situations, but I think it would be remiss of us if we didn't mention it in some way. I'm just interested what you've seen in working with the large range of clients that you have at PwC in terms of how attitudes to cyber and risk and IT and strategy have changed over the last 3 months. Has it all been very tactical in dealing with issues around remote working and provisioning of laptops and user IDs, or has it given your clients an opportunity to step back, take stock, and have a bit of a more strategic view of how they approach their cyber landscape?
Yeah, sure, Jonathan, it's a great question. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing. But I mean, just hitting your question head on, I think initially we saw a very tactical response. It was kind of, emergency crisis type of response. I think increasingly now we're seeing companies and CISOs kind of lifting their heads and thinking much more strategically around the opportunity that's created. And I think really in a nutshell, what we're seeing is an acceleration of all of the trends that we were seeing before the crisis. So, all the same things. We've seen a very dynamic threat environment, for example. We were already seeing a lot of ransomware out there. We're seeing more of it right now. A lot of COVID-19 themed phishing lures out there, which companies are falling for. So our incident response team is really busy dealing with ransomware, mainly ransomware type incidents.
Okay.
And in fact, most of the ransomware actors are doing two things. They're encrypting, well, first of all, they're getting in and they're taking normally customer or personal data. Then they're encrypting the environment. And then the ransom is based on both the letting the personal information out, but also the encryption of the entire estate. So, of course, companies at the moment dealing with one crisis, the last thing they need is to have to deal with another crisis. Yeah. So under that sort of threat, we're seeing a lot of companies actually pay the ransoms. And in fact, many companies, their IT is so rubbish that actually they have no real choice but to pay the ransoms because the backups aren't there. They don't know if they've got rid of the actor when they initially clean things up. So, that's a pretty dynamic environment. We're seeing.
Have you been able to quantify the financial impact of that, Grant? I know, PwC, you like to be able to kind of quantify these things.
Yeah, I don't have specific numbers, but we've seen a number of companies, pretty significant companies, literally on their knees, and talking about tens or hundreds of millions of pounds worth of potential impact on the business. I mean, real kind of survival-based stuff for certain businesses. And we've seen the impact down supply chains. One company that was hacked, a ransomware attack, actually, we saw the impact all the way through the aerospace supply chain into the plane manufacturers. So the impact is pretty significant on certain companies. So absolutely. I mean, the other thing we're, of course, seeing is, an acceleration of public cloud adoption right now. So I mean that's obvious in the share prices of Microsoft, Google, and Amazon right now. But that is, you know, that's a big trend that's going to keep. In fact, that's accelerating the need for CISOs to re-architect their security. So it was a trend that was going on before, but it's just going to happen much faster now. And actually, one of the things we're busy doing right now in May and June, or we've had a little bit of time for some of our people, we've got over 600 people across EMEA and our cyber teams who are doing Azure and AWS security certifications right now, just to prepare for what we think will be a huge uptick in requirements for cloud security focus as we go forward.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the other thing carry on.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, look, I mean, related to that is just an acceleration of digital channels, right? So companies have had to move very, very quickly into providing digital, you know, routes to market if they didn't already have them. And in many cases, they've gone very quickly setting up digital channels to market and potentially haven't thought about the security consequences while doing it. So through a lot of this acceleration, we've seen perhaps a bit of relaxation of security controls, even with remote working. Often companies have turned off some of the two-factor authentication type of controls, and you've had, you know, massive amounts of endpoints move out of the corporate network into people's homes and potentially unmanaged and unprotected. So, you know, I think that means, you know, as companies are sort of lifting their eyes up, they're starting to think about, well, how do we kind of redress a situation which has been done at speed without control.
Okay, okay. So looking across the kind of range of clients that you obviously come into contact with, Grant, over this period, you know, I think you've identified some of the characteristics of organizations that are in trouble, particularly those who've got, you know, unmodernized, aging IT estates. But what are the other factors that will put companies either in a good or a bad position to help them, not just through this current period, but longer term through facing many of these new threats that you've talked about?
Yeah, you know, I think it's quite interesting because it's become really clear that those companies that were more advanced in their digital transformation have really benefited from that through this crisis. You know, and I think even of our own journey at PWC, which I can talk about, you know, about 3 years ago, we decided to make a major investment in our cybersecurity, a $300 million program, where effectively it was almost a security-driven IT transformation, because we realized that, and this is the same with many companies, is actually our IT was not really securable. So we had to change the way we ran IT to be securable. And actually now our CISO is our CTO globally. So security has almost taken over the agenda in the IT agenda in our business, very much with an enabling view. But when it came to the crisis and we needed to get people working remotely, in the 2 weeks when effectively everybody went remote, we were able to scale up 250,000 remote connections over a period of 2 weeks. And that was primarily because of investments in Palo Alto Networks Prisma Access solution and big investments in identity and access management, especially SailPoint, which enabled us to provision all of that access globally, centrally, and very seamlessly. And you know what we're like, Jonathan, as an organization that's highly federated. That investment has made huge, huge payoffs. And we're seeing similar things with other organizations that have made those kind of investments. So I think that kind of agility and that investment is really what's making the difference, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, all of that sounds eminently sensible, Grant, but of course it comes at a price. Those sort of programs and that type of digital transformation doesn't come cheap. And if there are three truths in life, death, taxes, and ever reducing IT budgets, have you seen clients trying to fight for more budget share and more spend and more investment, particularly in cyber, when generally speaking, there's this ever ongoing downward pressure on budgets and costs?
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right. There's, you know, we're going to have budget pressures all around, and security professionals are not going to be spared that pressure. I will say one thing though, is I've been pleased to see that security budgets have been reasonably resilient. so far through the crisis. I've seen a few stats around, companies kind of putting the brakes on a little bit, but actually in general, I'd say we've seen a fair amount of resilience. But make no mistake, we're going to have those pressures come through. What we're talking to companies about now is to take what we call a fit for growth type of approach to this. And actually, we believe there's a lot of cost that can be taken out of security right now just by thinking about re-architecting networks, reprioritizing what companies do. So actually getting on the front foot right now based on the big trends I mentioned earlier, and at the same time really thinking about costs. So one example is most companies have huge numbers of security technologies that they've invested in, all point solutions. We know in most cases it doesn't work together. There's still problems. So we expect to see a trend towards what we call a platform play. So emerging tech companies like Palo Alto Networks, Microsoft as well, are likely to win from this, where companies will move to more of this platform play. They'll look to leverage licenses that they've bought in other spaces, especially in Microsoft. So there's quite a strategic approach to take to rationalizing architectures, reprioritizing spend, and getting on the front foot at the same time.
Interesting. The other trend, I suppose, that we could discuss off the back of that is you've talked a lot about digital transformation and IT renewal. Many of your clients and many companies that I work with and that we work with at Turnkey are undergoing major application systems renewal, either through upgrading their SAP systems to S4 or putting in digital platforms like Salesforce or Workday. And the research we've done at Turnkey suggests we have this habitual and continuing issue that the whole security agenda is a bit of an afterthought in those programs. In fact, I think the survey said 2/3 of people we asked said they wished it had been given more priority, more focus, and more investment during the project. And that would have saved money and having to come up and clean up the mess that was left behind afterwards. Do you think that's ever going to change? I mean, I've been at this game for 25 years, and it was the same when I started out. Why do you think this is never changing?
Yeah, Jonathan, you and I did go back a long time on this one. I think we were pioneers in the first wave of ERP on trying to figure out how to do this. And I think we thought we cracked it back then. We probably did. But what amazes me is the corporate memory seems to have kind of disappeared on this issue. So, it's interesting. I think a lot of it has been lost. But I am seeing some progress now. Some companies, as you say, companies getting more aware and starting to wish they had done things in a different way. I think the world right now, the opportunity to differentiate through actually having good security and embedding it within your digital transformation is going to become more and more apparent. You think of how much we've just got to rely on technology in the last months. Yeah. So I think this will start to move. But I think the other thing to remember here is that, we as security and controls professionals need to move on as well, because the world's moved into the cloud. A lot of security and controls professionals are still thinking on-prem. Yeah. And actually there's a lot that's changed. I mean, how many security and controls professionals really understand Agile, DevSecOps, software-defined networking, how all of those trends have totally changed the risk landscape. And I think we have to move the game on a little bit. Some have, some haven't. And I mentioned our investment in cloud security training earlier. That's kind of what we're doing.
Okay, and I suppose making an analogy here, Grant, between what we've seen over the last sort of 30 or 40 years with enterprise applications and the advent of ERP type systems, we're still in the security world in kind of the old world, aren't we? You need to implement multiple point solutions with specific technology features and functions to secure your landscape. Do you think there could ever be a kind of ERP of security, or a silver bullet type solution that's going to knit all these requirements together into some single connected solution?
Yeah, look, that does sound like a utopia.
It does.
But look, you know, if you look at, I mentioned Microsoft and Palo Alto Networks a little earlier. I mean, if you look at the amount of investment that Microsoft's been making to become a really complete security platform play, they're not there yet, by the way. There's a lot more still to do, and Microsoft's actually really good in their own Azure environment right now, but they're investing to cover the broader environment too. I wouldn't dismiss Microsoft, I wouldn't dismiss Palo Alto Networks. There are a few others out there that are actually investing to move in that direction. I expect that the platform play will become a much bigger topic for security experts in the future, just because people, they just cannot afford to keep having all of these multiple point solutions. It's getting too complicated, and doesn't solve the security problem.
No, it doesn't. And from my perspective, I think what I've seen is no security-focused vendor has really grasped this issue and tried to knit together solutions that deal with application controls and access, risk management, cyber security, perimeter security, identity management, all these different aspects. And it's still a massively complicated exercise to get all these things in and working properly. Do you think there's also an issue, Grant, that organizations tend to, in my experience, and I've seen nothing to suggest this is changing, manage risk in a holistic or enterprise sense in one part of the organization, and manage security and cyber typically in the IT function? And those two aren't necessarily comfortable bedfellows that work closely and sort of in harmony together. And when you're proposing solutions to organizations, you're often dealing with different stakeholders in different parts of the organization, which makes it difficult to get a single joined up set of requirements.
Yeah, look, that's definitely still an issue. And I think it's got to be addressed in a couple of ways. I mean, I think leading CISOs are getting much better in the language of risk management, and they're going to need to be effective in their roles and be able to report up. Risk managers need to get much more effective in the language of digital transformation and IT, because actually, if you look at the proportion of corporate risk, in its entirety that is actually now in the digital space, it's way bigger than it used to be. So, I think there's a bit of a meeting of minds there. I think, a lot of this kind of risk conversation tends to come into where the CISOs report in organizations as well. And it's interesting right now. We used to have this trend towards, we talked about this trend towards CISOs reporting up through risk. Now that seems to have only happened and is only continuing to happen in the regulated industries like FS. In other industries, and I sort of support this, actually the CISO reporting to whoever is in control of the digital transformation and strategic technology agenda is probably the best place for it to be. Going back to our previous conversation around how do you get security baked into that transformation. So for the technology leader and the security leader to be joined at the hip is almost essential. And if they're stuck in risk management, they're just not there having the day-to-day discussions around how to architect an IT environment which is secure and secure.
Sure. But if you tie a CISO too closely to transformation or digital projects or IT functions, are you not creating an inherent conflict of interest where effectively a CISO is marking the homework of his own function?
Yeah.
Is there not an argument for almost making them completely independent, or indeed making it an external regulatory type function?
It's a good question, which is why your regulated industries do have the split the line of defense. I think if you look in non-regulated companies, to some extent, you got to ask what the task at hand today is, and the task at hand is getting digital transformation done. Having said that, I think there is a big gap in all companies around the ongoing testing of the effectiveness of security. in the organization. So, I think virtually every organization we look at where there's been a big security issue, we find a big program of work which has happened, and nobody actually went back to check the effectiveness of the controls. Were the things actually operating as they were said? So I think we need to find the right balance of companies continuously testing what they're implementing. Otherwise, it won't happen. I think we've all been there.
Okay. So how do you know when an organization is good at this stuff? No organization can ever crack cyber, okay? But it seems to me one of the, if only the key measure around the effectiveness of cyber in an organization is whether their IT estate has been compromised in some way. What sort of KPIs can you put in place to measure that more on an ongoing basis that isn't just this kind of Armageddon event? Has it happened, yes or no? It's a rather binary measure of effectiveness.
Yeah, we are seeing a big trend towards improving the sort of reporting that goes up to the executive level around cyber. Because traditionally it's been, very event-based. How many attempted incidents that we have, or, it's stuff that you really can't get your head around. So I think we're starting to see more intelligent reporting, more risk-based reporting, which will help. Even things that start to understand trust relationships between companies and their customers, in terms of how data is being handled and dealt with, we think will become better indicators of how good companies are at security. So I think we'll see that reporting move on. I also think that, if you look at this area more broadly, cyber is going to get bigger after this crisis. We are going to need to be thinking about keeping cyber up with an acceleration of cloud-based transformation, et cetera, et cetera. And this is really the time when security and privacy becomes a differentiator for business. We've talked about it for years, but now when we really need security, when we really need technology to be resilient, we really need to create trust with employees and customers. This is the time, this is the opportunity for CISOs just to get that whole agenda right.
Yeah, okay. So we've talked about CISOs quite a bit during this conversation, where they should report, how we measure their effectiveness. But I'm sure you and I have touched on this earlier, Grant. There is a shortage of top quality CISOs, and I think I'd even go far as to say an unwillingness to pay top dollar for top talent in the market for these guys. How do you see that market going and that role evolving? Do you see more traditional IT focused people, or the net for attracting and requiring and retaining CISOs going to a much wider base of skills outside of just IT?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's an interesting area because any CISO needs to be able to understand the technical complexity of what they're dealing with. But in the end, the more important skill set is becoming leadership, ability to effect change, ability to report to the board, ability to set a purpose and get a team motivated behind it. All of those broader leadership pieces are the things that are becoming more prevalent. Now, I actually work very closely with one of the leading headhunters in this space. His name is Tim Cook, and he has a model called the CIRO model. And really what it does is it puts CISOs in boxes 1 to 5, 5 being the most mature. And he believes that in 5, which is sort of this area where you have these really heavy hitting CISOs who are able to affect the change agenda in a very large organization and have the communication skills to go with it. He thinks there are only about 10 in the world, or less than 10. And he thinks they're all in the US, none in Europe. So, that shows a little bit about, the kind of people that are going to be needed in certain large organizations. It may well be that certain organizations only need somebody who's a 3, so we certainly don't need 5s in every organization. But it does provide a way of looking at the different types of CISOs. And actually, you can look at companies and say, well, in different periods of their journeys, they may require different types of CISOs. If you're in the middle of a big transformation project, you require a certain type of person. If you're in a stable environment, you may require a different type, and that sort of maps through in the sort of 1 to 5. But really, those 5s are the guys who are, in the 7-figure sort of salary brackets in the US, and we expect to see more of those.
Do you think UK economy, the IT industry, the world we all operate in, is investing the right skills to grow these security leaders of the future?
I think the UK, I look across EMEA every day, and as you know, I spent 3 years leading our US business until 2 years ago. I think the UK has done, in general, a really good job of developing CISOs and cyber professionals. There's been a real focus on education, and especially if I look across the rest of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, I'd say we're leading, and I'd say the UK has, some of the deepest skills and some of the people who furthest up that 1 to 5. You'll find a number of 4s coming out of the UK. Some of the larger sort of Western European countries have not invested in the same way and don't have the same maturity and think of things in a much more compliance-driven manner than some of the UK CISOs. And I'd say there's some pockets of maturity, perhaps in the Nordics as well, but generally we've done a good job. Okay,
interesting. So Grant, through this discussion, we've painted a kind of multifaceted picture of corporate organizations under threat, vendors of security solutions doing reasonably well, but not necessarily very joined up. We see these external threat agencies and individuals out there causing issues all the time. Is anyone winning at the moment, or is it just a black and difficult picture for everybody, and the best you can hope for is just to kind of keep your head above water?
Look, I think the winners are those who are making the right investments, who are being agile, who are seeing cybersecurity as something that is really part of IT. As I said, earlier, many businesses, if you just look at their technology infrastructure, you look at them and you say that is unsecurable. So the transformation, I talked a bit earlier about our journey, the transformation needs to be done with security in mind. And I think the organizations who are thinking about it that way are actually getting themselves in a strong position. I go back to the competitive advantage position.
Yeah.
I honestly believe that organizations who make that sort of investment, who take the opportunity now as part of getting on that front foot to create securable technology environments, will find that they're able to move faster in the future with all this acceleration going. And that's just going to benefit. In fact, some of the companies that have struggled to scale up remote working are those companies who hadn't made those investments before. So I think we'll start to see all of the things we've been talking about materialize from that.
Yeah. And of course, if you start to look at getting security right as an enabler of effective digital transformation, it becomes much more a value creating activity than just, there are some guys in a dark room over there complaining that what we're doing isn't secure enough. So
yeah, it becomes about speed.
Yeah,
you're more confident to move fast into that next opportunity because you have the capability.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So I'll ask you one final question, just for a bit of fun, Grant. Mm-hmm. If I was to give you $1 million, not as a PWC partner that you need $1 million, of course, but if I was to give you $1 million to invest in some kind of security solution, software vendor, where would you place your bet?
Look, I think there's some great investments out there. I'm not going to answer that directly, Jonathan.
I didn't think you would.
The interesting thing I will say is those those with clear eyes are investing right now. And, so I see a number of sovereign wealth funds, VCs out there actively investing in cyber because they can see it's only going to get bigger because of what's going on right now. And so I think that if you're looking at specific sectors in the area, I think anything 5G, IoT, OT, that sort of IoT, industrial IoT type of space, as well as cloud-based security solutions, and the platform plays, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
those are all good places to be looking at.
So everything then.
Well, no, I narrowed it down a bit for you then.
Yeah. All I can say is I work a lot with private equity firms. Cyber is a very hot market. There are businesses being sold at ridiculously high multiples at the moment. So, maybe it's for that reason, harder to generate those super returns. Grant, that's been a massively engaging and insightful conversation. Thank you very much for your insights into what you're seeing in the market, working both with PwC's clients and internally in your own organization as well. Just before we close, I was going to turn to some of the questions we've had through, as I promised I would at the start, and I'll just kind of read these out, and we'll see where we get to. I think I can get through at least 3 or 4 of these. So. Have you seen new attack methods emerging during the current crisis, in addition to an increase in existing methods, such as COVID-related phishing?
I'd say just the short answer to that is really it's been an acceleration of all of the same actors using the same techniques and doing exactly as the question stipulate, which is using the current environment, with COVID-19 tablets. We've seen a few nation states, once again, probably similar types of groups doing different types of espionage activities, but it's kind of the same guys doing maybe slightly tweaked things, but same techniques, almost universal.
Okay, same stuff, different content.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Do you expect there to be more leniency from audit and auditors to recognize the disruption of COVID-19?
I think, I'd sort of add regulators into that. I think there will be in the very immediate term, and there may be a bit of lenience around, delivery of things over the next, maybe through into the last quarter of the calendar year. But I think it's coming back with a vengeance because people will realize this stuff just became more important. I think the regulators, GDPR, I think the regulators have held off a little bit by hitting people. I think it comes in 2021 with a vengeance. Yeah. Okay. Next question. This is quite a long question. I'll try and paraphrase it as best I can. It's really around remote access to sensitive databases and sensitive documents, particularly in areas like banking. So have you seen companies introduce additional security? Many of them previously wouldn't have allowed remote access to that type of thing. Now they haven't really got any choice. What have they done to kind of enable that to keep their businesses running? Yeah, it's been one of the most sensitive parts of going remote in banking. And interestingly on the banking side, partly to do with regulators, banks have actually been behind in their cloud-based adoption and transformation. Okay. So banks found themselves in a worse position in some ways than other companies because blame the regulator, blame whatever. But so they've had to catch up around things like that. And of course, many of the traders actually still ended up going onto trading floors. But we are seeing a bunch of different technology solutions being adopted very fast now to allow those kind of virtual trading desks at home. I'm seeing a lot of companies trialing solutions and getting them up and running. So I think the trading floor, whatever was going to happen there around trading floors being more remote will happen. As a result of the solutions. There are lots of solutions out there.
Yes, I guess needs must. The business has to keep running. Final question I was just going to touch on here is about cyber insurance companies use cyber insurance as a mitigation against some of the risks we've been discussing. Is that an adequate response to this, or do attitudes need to change?
I mean, cyber insurance is an essential part of the risk management that companies should put around cyber. But it's only a component, and it should be really thought about and integrated into a broader risk management framework. And it's, you know, it's increasingly maturing. Yeah, I think that's probably what I'd say about it. You know, virtually every company has it now, and they use it when they have breaches. It'll continue to mature, but part of a framework, part of a risk. It's a risk management tool along with a bunch of other things, including an effective program.
Good. Yeah, I agree. Just one tool in an arsenal of many. Okay, Grant. Well, I think we better stop there. We've run over by a few minutes, so I'm going to call this to a close. Once again, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone out there who's either listening live or is going to follow up and access this coverage remotely at a later date. But thank you, everybody, and thank you most of all, Grant, for your time.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.